We live in a time of unprecedented political division. Americans are more polarized, more angry at each other, and more convinced that the other side is fundamentally wrong than at almost any point in modern history. Walk down a suburban street today, and you'll see it everywhere. Neighbors who once chatted over the fence now avoid eye contact. Families gather for holidays with a tension that didn't exist a generation ago. Friendships end over a single social media post. Political disagreement has become personal animosity. But how did we get here? America has always had political differences. The country was founded on debate and disagreement. Yet something has shifted in recent decades that has made our divisions deeper, more hostile, and more pervasive than ever before. Understanding why requires us to look at multiple forces that have come together to create the perfect storm of polarization. The first major factor is the rise of partisan media. For most of American history, people got their news from a relatively small number of sources. 3 major television networks dominated the airwaves. Newspapers were the primary source of information, and while they had editorial leanings, they reported largely on the same factual events. Everyone saw the same pictures, heard the same stories, and operated from a shared foundation of basic facts. That world began to change in the 1990s. Cable news arrived, and with it came the first real opportunity for media outlets to target specific partisan audiences. Then came the internet and social media, which fundamentally transformed how information flows through our society. Today, you don't have to watch the evening news or read a newspaper to get informed. Instead, algorithms learn your preferences and show you more of what you already like. You see news stories that confirm what you already believe. You encounter opinions that match your own. You rarely encounter perspectives that challenge you because the technology is specifically designed to keep you engaged by showing you more of what you want. This creates what researchers call filter bubbles or echo chambers. Democrats increasingly get their news from sources that present a progressive worldview. Republicans get their news from sources that present a conservative worldview. When 2 groups of people are consuming completely different information, they literally live in different factual realities. A story that is front-page news in one bubble might be completely absent from another. An event that one side sees as a major scandal, the other side might not have heard about at all. This isn't simply about opinion or interpretation anymore. It's about the raw facts that people encounter. When your information diet is completely separate from someone else's, it becomes nearly impossible to have a real conversation. You're not just disagreeing about values or policy, you're disagreeing about what actually happened. The second major factor is the decline of local institutions and community bonds. In previous generations, Americans were deeply embedded in local communities. You belonged to a church, a civic organization, a union, a neighborhood association. These institutions brought people together across political lines. You might disagree with someone about national politics, but you served on the same church board or volunteered together for the local food bank. You had relationships that transcended political identity. These local institutions created what sociologists call social capital. They bound communities together and created shared purpose. Over the past few decades, participation in these organizations has declined dramatically. Church attendance is down. Union membership has plummeted. Civic organizations that once filled community centers are now struggling. People are more isolated than ever. They work longer hours, commute farther, and spend more time in front of screens. The result is that we've lost the connective tissue that once held communities together. Without these institutions, political identity has become a more central part of how we define ourselves. It's filled the vacuum left by declining community bonds. Your politics aren't just your politics anymore. They're your identity, your tribe, your community. This makes political disagreement feel more personal and threatening. It's no longer just a difference of opinion. It feels like a fundamental rejection of who you are. This shift is especially pronounced among younger Americans, who are less likely to be members of religious congregations, unions, or civic organizations than their parents or grandparents were. Without these alternative sources of identity and community, politics has become even more central to their sense of self. The third major factor is economic anxiety and inequality. The past 50 years have seen a massive concentration of wealth in America. The gap between the richest Americans and everyone else has grown to levels not seen since the 1920s. For many Americans, particularly those without college degrees, economic conditions have stagnated or declined. Real wages haven't kept up with inflation. Jobs that once provided stable middle-class incomes have disappeared or been replaced with lower-wage alternatives. Healthcare costs have skyrocketed. Student loan debt has become crushing. Housing affordability has become a crisis in many areas. People are stressed, anxious, and scared about their economic futures. This creates fertile ground for political polarization. When people feel economically threatened, they become more tribal, more defensive, and more willing to see the other side as enemies rather than fellow citizens. Both political parties have exploited this anxiety, but in different ways. Progressives blame the wealthy and corporations for inequality and advocate for more government intervention and redistribution. Conservatives blame excessive government regulation and advocate for free markets and lower taxes. These aren't compatible visions, and they appeal to different groups of people based on their economic interests and worldview. The result is a deepening divide along class and regional lines. Wealthy urban areas trend one way. Rural areas and struggling industrial cities trend another. Politicians have learned that they can win by energizing their base with messages that demonize the other side. They don't need to appeal to the middle anymore. They can win with a coalition of passionate supporters. The fourth major factor is the rise of identity politics and the realignment of the parties around cultural issues. For much of the 20th century, the two major American political parties were ideologically diverse. There were conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. The parties cut across regional and cultural lines. But beginning in the 1960s and accelerating through the 1980s and 90s, the parties began to sort themselves by ideology and identity. The Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s created new political fault lines. Social issues like abortion, race, and religion began to matter more. Over time, Republicans became the party of cultural conservatives and Christians. Democrats became the party of secular progressives and racial minorities. This sorting has been nearly complete. Today, the two parties are more ideologically coherent, but also more divided from each other. This realignment has made politics feel like a battle between fundamentally different visions of America and what it means to be American. It's not just about economic policy anymore. It's about whose values are dominant, whose way of life is respected, whose vision of the country will prevail. For cultural conservatives who feel that their values are under attack, supporting their party becomes a defensive necessity. For progressives who see injustice and inequality, supporting their party becomes a moral imperative. Neither side feels like they can compromise, because they see the stakes as existential. This is much deeper than traditional political disagreement. It's about identity, morality, and the kind of society we want to be. The fifth major factor is the breakdown of institutional trust. In previous generations, Americans had relatively high levels of trust in major institutions. They trusted Congress, the courts, the military, the media, and other pillars of the establishment. Even when they disagreed politically, they believed in the system itself. Over the past few decades, that trust has eroded dramatically. Watergate, the Vietnam War, the financial crisis, police brutality, and countless other events have revealed that institutions don't always work as advertised. Politicians are corrupt. Corporations put profits over people. The media has its own biases. The courts are not always fair. Military interventions sometimes cause more harm than good. These revelations are real and deserve criticism. But the result is that people no longer believe that legitimate institutions can resolve disputes fairly. If you don't trust the system, you can't accept its verdict. If your side loses an election, it must have been rigged or stolen. If the courts rule against you, they must be biased. If the media reports something you disagree with, they must be lying. When institutional trust breaks down, people become more willing to see politics as a zero-sum conflict that must be won at all costs. Compromise becomes impossible because you can't trust the other side to follow through on agreements. Norms around how we conduct politics break down because the institutions that enforce them have lost legitimacy. The result is a kind of political tribalism, where winning is all that matters and anything is justified in pursuit of victory. This is fundamentally different from traditional political competition. The sixth major factor is the rise of partisan sorting at the geographic level. In previous generations, America was politically mixed. Most areas had both Democrats and Republicans. People lived among people who disagreed with them politically. They encountered different perspectives in their daily lives. Over the past few decades, America has become increasingly geographically sorted. Democrats concentrate in cities and liberal suburbs. Republicans concentrate in rural areas and conservative suburbs. This sorting is the result of both individual choices and systemic factors. People increasingly choose to live near others who share their values. Real estate markets have concentrated wealth in certain areas. Job markets have shifted in ways that create regional differences. The result is that most Americans now live in areas where their political views are the norm rather than the exception. When you live in a politically homogeneous area, you lose exposure to people who think differently. You don't have friends or coworkers who are on the other side. You don't have relatives who hold different views. Your entire social circle reinforces your existing beliefs. This makes it easier to view the other side as alien, different, fundamentally wrong. You don't know them as people anymore. They're just abstractions, caricatures, enemies. This geographic sorting has also created regional inequality. Some areas are thriving while others are left behind. This exacerbates the sense that different parts of the country have fundamentally different interests and values.